And listening to the presentation from Telkom, I can't not say this. Please pardon me. I always wonder why state-owned enterprises are not functioning properly. And the advice is the economic paradigm is incorrect. It's totally neoliberal, totally capitalist. State-owned enterprises are supposed to be state-owned enterprises. So the first thing that we want to say as COSATU is we just want to give the cautions against WIL. And that's where we agree with the presentation from Telkom. That in the main, our history tells us that there's been a much more focus on young workers, and there's been a very serious neglect of older workers. And we think that that's the first area of caution that we should be speaking about, because in many enterprises we've had to go in and fuel the fires where young persons were not allowed to go in because old workers were saying, you are creating armies that are going to take us out in a very short space of time. So our first advice is, if we want to take work-integrated learning, there has to be a thorough bias and an even balance. A bias for young workers, but a balance between young workers and older workers. And if you don't do that, don't call us in when the problems are there, because we had provided this advice long time ago. The second thing is work-integrated learning, as opposed to the short-term interventions. It's not supposed to be a quick fix solution. It's not supposed to be capitalist-oriented. It's supposed to be developmental. It's supposed to be transformative. It's supposed to provide access to the workplace and mobility up in the ladders. So it's not supposed to be a just to do. It must be a must to do, but a must for the business. And with work-integrated learning, there is sometimes the lack of recognition of experiential skills that are current, are existing, are in production. So the problem becomes, the same problem that you identified, the problem becomes you're training people who are out of the workplace, they do not understand the workplace. By the time they hit the workplace has moved. I come from the chemicals industry and not the ICT, and almost every sector of the economy has got those challenges. Some of my colleagues and comrades from my past life are here, and we share the same experiences. We might not share the same economic paradigm. We also, with work-integrated learning, have to balance the needs of employers against those of workers. And our view as COSATU is that training has to be linked to grading and to recognition, and has to be linked to pay. Workers won't take up your training programs if they do not mean anything for them, especially in grading. Maybe pay is something else which is, it needs a different forum, it has to be negotiated differently. But at some stage it has to go into areas of pay, because with management, training is linked to grading and is linked to pay. And the question we're raising is, why not in the production line? Second thing is we need to train so that we cushion the effects of retrenchment. We're not saying training will ensure that there is no retrenchment. But if you properly train, even if you retrench, you provide proper skills so that people can survive out of retrenchment. So we're saying work-integrated learning is a must. We are also saying train for retirement. And we say this notion, which you are always flying, that when you train, there must be a recognition that some of them must be entrepreneurs. Well, those in the workplace are better entrepreneurs. They have the skill, they have the experience, they have the expertise. But mostly when you speak about young workers, you say, we train them to be entrepreneurs. I still have to see those entrepreneurs who have never hit the production line, who are straight from school and directly to be entrepreneurs. I have to, maybe that's why entrepreneurs have got this high percentage failure rate. Maybe that's one of the reasons. Maybe we need to conduct research. We also need to realize that workers have got campaigns on progressive macroeconomic policies. And those campaigns are based on a simple notion of tax justice. And we do not want training that has a narrow focus on this capitalist focus on grants. And we know that many of you, every time we talk about work integrated learning, your only narrow focus is grants. How am I going to improve my grants? And you know what's the problem with that particular argument? You tell us that you are using 5% of your payroll for training, but you are concerned almost to the point of like a battle around grants. So when captains of business through BUSA launched the court action, our first issue was, why is BUSA launching a court action on the grant regulations? Because they are telling us that they are using 5% of the total payroll to train. So we're only taking 1% and we're increasing the discretionary grant, but they are going to court. And you know what's the evidence of that? There is nothing that of the 5% that is being used. There is no evidence. Because with the 1%, you can take us to court. But you can't account for the rest of the 4%. And one of the things that we realize all the time is that employers fail to reinvest the proceeds of grants into training. So each and every year when they receive grants, they take those particular grants not back into training. You see the pay packets, you see the bonuses of training executives skyrocketing. I've not checked yours, but it's about time that we check yours, since that you are a listed company and you put those on. Yeah. So we're very concerned about this. We're also concerned about the cost of and the levels of the worker programs. And we know that with the programs that workers take up, the costs are very low, and those of executives, the costs are very high. We do have particular anomalies. For instance, we saw with the services SETA, when the first investigations were done, that there was a training program for domestic workers that was more expensive than an MPA program or an MPL program. Well, we don't encourage workers to do an MPA program, but it was so expensive than an MPA program. And we were wondering what is happening in this domestic workers program. About 50,000 for 6 weeks training. You still remember that? It was when the investigation of the cost of programs or services SETA was done. And you can go back and check that. And one of the things we see all the time, why there is no balance, it's because employers are much more concerned about the levy levels. You see, when you, in section 18 of the skills development, there's training for the employed, 18.1, training for the unemployed. The reason why there is a high uptake of the unemployed, it's one, the levy, I mean the actual program and the cost is quite high. And there is even a tax rebate for the company. So the reason why you're taking up most of the young workers, it's not because you're concerned with the plight of the young workers, we know. But you're looking at the financial margins. And we can cite many examples. And for those that want to challenge me, especially in the NSA, in the past 3 months, we were going into those particular sectors to collect that particular evidence. We're also seeing a failure to implement ILO Convention 140. Convention 140 has got a simple provision: paid education and training leave. Now all of the ABET programs are done on a Saturday or afternoon or at night. And we're wondering, what is this nonsense? Because executive programs are not done on Saturday or at night. You are given time off, block release to go and train. Yeah, you do for your own studies, you go on weekends, we encourage that, but you are equally given block releases. You don't give. Maybe it's not true in government, but in the private sector we see block releases. We also see a very low support for ABET in your training programs. In fact, when we evaluated in the monitoring and evaluation team of the NSA, which I chair, I can tell you that most of the seaters are not participating in the area of ABET. And there is evidence. Unless you are participating, that information is not going to the seaters and therefore is not coming to us. But one of the things we are picking up is that there is lack of participation in ABET. We also see the lack of the failure to recognize the low levels. So for instance, there are many in the mining sector, in construction, there are many what we call, in labor market terms, artisan aids, that have been artisan aids for a long time with the required training, but we've seen those particular artisan aids not being recognized. So we also see in the main, if you look at the employment equity report, each and every year for the last 4 years, we're seeing the lack of alignment between skills development and employment equity. And with that, we are very concerned. You know who are the highest takers of skills development programs and subsequently promotion? In free South Africa, it's white women. And there's evidence, documented evidence, white women. Uptake of skills development. And if you look at the employment equity report, that's what they tell you. So what we're seeing is that South African firms are failing to transform. At the top of South African firms, in the main, and we're seeing this trend also going into SOEs, it's white males, and then the second highest represented category, it's Indian males. And we don't think that bodes proper for employment equity. If you go to evaluation of employment equity reports in KZN, you sometimes are not sure whether you are in KZN or you are in Bombay. I may be out of order. But if you look at the levels of... No. I think we should say things as they are. If you look at how many people are in the employment levels in KZN, first you must look at the total population of KZN. Who is in the labor market? Then go into your senior management. The employment equity reports are there. They are in the employment equity section of the Department of Labor. So go to them. Even in the Western Cape, where coloureds are in the majority, we're seeing white women being at the top. So what we are seeing is that there is no transformation. So we can't say there's work integrated learning. We're learning in the production line when there is not alignment to transformation. We also sometimes find that work integrated learning is pitched as a very high cost exercise. And we say that there are various mechanisms for work integrated learning to be not as expensive as it is. And one of the reasons is, who are the providers? Who are the providers? Since 1999, till about 2000 and NSDS 3, I think, came about 2009. There's been a very high upswing of private providers, and the cost of the programs have escalated. And it was not by default that we argued for public providers in NSDS 3. We think that the no fee increase ultimately leading to free education can be catered for by a grant system, a revamped grant system. The workplaces need young people. Young people come from higher ed institutions and even TVET programs. So, and the same argument that the minister is now trying to pitch that argument, that there must be some alignment of private sector into the problems that we have in the no fee increase, in the free education. Ultimately, higher ed education has to be free. Now, what are the policies of COSATU? The first one is there has to be a focus on the low levels. That's fundamental. If you don't focus on the low levels, you do not have pools. You do not subscribe to the NQF. In your assessment tools, there has to be usage of RPL. Those that have not begun to use RPL are lost. There has to be an increase of the levy, not 1%. In 1996, we put a demand, it's 19 years old now, that levies has to be at 4%. It's in line to what enterprises are telling us. They are telling us they are using 5% to trade. There's evidence, they say that every day. So why are the levies not following that? We also need companies to consider is a very soft word. Yeah, it's not used in the labor movement. We have a demand of paid education and training leave. I don't want to use soft words. Paid education and training leave. We also need collective agreements that are aligned to skills development and employment equity. Because once you negotiate each and every year, you need to check how far you are on transformation. Now, I know transformation is an uncomfortable subject. Even some of my friends go for my jugular when I start transformation. But it is a must. And somebody has to say it. It has to be me. We need fully accredited or modular-based learning programs. And I heard this thing that sometimes we focus on short-term programs, and this particular focus on short-term programs, it's a business imperative. But what we're saying is that even short-term programs must be modular-based and must link to a full qualification. So that learning should be progressive, it should lead to a qualification. We always see when we interview people for particular positions, people come with 20-page CVs. And in the 20-page CVs, all they are accounting for is 5 weeks training programs. 300 of 5 weeks training programs in a space of 10 years in health and safety. And what we find is they are not competent, even in the areas, because it's short-term interventions. The orientation was a bit different. We also need a major public provision usage, and we need limited private provision. We do not think that education is a profit issue. And I know that private providers don't agree with this. But we don't think that this high influx of private providers was there in 1930, was there in 1970. And we've got evidence against that. The state-owned enterprises were the ones pushing education and training. You can go back to historical data, you will find that. I mean, the issue about the balance of employed and unemployed we started with. We also need a skills development that has got a total provincial footprint not skills development of major metropolitan areas. And currently skills development is spoken about in Durban, in PE, East London, in Cape Town, in Bloemfontein, little extent in Velkom, in mining, and in Joburg, Pretoria. And that's not South Africa. We also need, I mean, we're not even accounting for Mpumalanga, for God's sake, and the Northern Cape. We also need shop steward-based skills development and employment equity committees. What we're seeing because of the legislation, and that's why one of our demands is collective agreements linked to skills development. The legislation for skills development and employment equity is not a bargaining principled legislation. It's a consultation principled legislation. So everybody has to be consulted. It has to be a workplace forum. But has the workplace forum delivered transformation? Many of you come from industry. And those that don't come from industry, let's tell you, it has not. So our demand is that shop steward-based skills development and employment equity committees. What needs to be done? First, the schooling system, the expansion of the TVET delivery, because we don't think that higher education alone can deliver on workplace or work-integrated learning. In fact, we're finding much more in TVET and universities of technology work-integrated learning, and to a very little extent in universities. So we think there has to be an expansion of that particular sector. We also need the state-owned enterprises, the correctly economically framed state-owned enterprises to lead skills development, including the state. By the way, one of our problems with the state, the democratic state, is in the Skills Development Levy Act. Government is excluded from paying levies. And we have, in these 2 years, we must sort out that particular nonsense. Because how do we say to the private sector, lead in training, when you are not showing that we must lead in training? So this is a problem we have with the DHET and the entire departmental state institutions, and we've raised these things at NEDLEC. We think it has been for a long time. The students have shown us that we probably need to march and march into the National Assembly and stop National Assembly so that we can be listened to on that particular point. We also need the reskilling, the alignment of the curriculum contents and the alignment from basic TVET to high ed, so that we link with the labor market needs. Some of the programs that we see in the university, in TVET institutions, in universities of technology, and also the concentration span. Most TVETs are offering a program called office management. Many of them, office management, office management, office management. Where are you going to locate those in the labor market? I mean, where is the demand? In whose offices? Where is the demand? Government offices are saturated with the numbers. So we need to have programs that are linking to the labor market in engineering, in commerce, in those areas where there is a high need. Not what we have in the TVET programs. Same with universities, by the way. The lecture halls in the social sciences are full to the brim. The lecture halls in engineering are running at 10%. And we go to these universities and see those things almost every day. We also need a reskilling of the existing youth, unemployed youth, and even some of the graduates to fill the vacancies that are there. We also need a total removal of the labor brokers. who profit through skills development. Let me tell you, with the youth wage incentive and skills development levy, we have created a huge monster of capitalist organizations called labor brokers. And what they do is they are profiting through those particular two. So that's why in NSDS 3, we're advocating for public providers, because we could see that in terms of their levels of play. And we're not saying they do not have any area of play, but their levels of play are just not the proper levels. We need to embark on massive adult education programs through the media. One of the things we don't know what SABC and the COO is doing. You've got SABC TV programs, and alongside you're running with high levels of adult illiteracy. And these programs are flighting American soapies, what soapies, but the key need of the country is not addressed with the mass media, including the private sector media. We're not expecting anything different from the private sector media, but we think the state-owned media must drive adult education. On simple areas, most adults can't go to an ATM and withdraw money or deposit money. Most adults can't use these, including myself, by the way, these photos. When we went to the COSATU Congress, I was asked, do your photo, put it through your phone, send it through, because I was in Kimberley, and I struggled. So most adults have got those particular problems. Sorry? Yeah. So we need to do massive adult education programs. And by adult education, we do not mean things that we don't know. We mean skills so that adults can survive. We need to force government departments to fund, plan, and report on skilling. Most government departments, the reason why the PSETA is almost defunct, the reason why the ETDP SETA does not get major funding, it's because of government departments. We also need, at the end, to align skills development to employment equity. We need to repeat this point up until many of our friends don't like us. But skills development has to be linked to employment equity. For us to achieve those demands, we need a developmental state with clearly oriented SOEs. We need an end to skills development privatization. We need an increased levy system. We need controlled institutional fees in the higher ed institutions so that we curb the erosion of public funds. We need free education. Thank you.
The University of Johannesburg. Rethink, reinvent.